Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we are talking about the art of succinct communication and how you can be heard, because we know that there's probably lots of you that have left a meeting thinking, I really didn't get my point across, or maybe you noticed that people's eyes were glazing over when you were speaking, and really you're not alone with that, because the ability to communicate succinctly is one of the most underrated leadership skills, and it's one of the biggest barriers to progression that we see with our clients. So let's get into it, as we always do. And Jackie, I'm going to hand it over to you to give us an overview on why unclear communication really does hold leaders back more than a technical skills gap in most instances.
It really does. I've seen this so many times. If I look back to even over the last 6 months and think about different coaching clients and people that I've worked with, I think this is one of the things that people become increasingly aware of when they are aiming for progression and getting to the point where they're wanting to be in a strategic role and be at a senior level, because they will get that feedback of you talk too much, you don't get your point across, or like you say, they will notice some of the signs that they find it hard to capture people's attention. And I think what's really tricky about this is there's lots of reasons why this happens, and people probably need to understand that about themselves and understand what is it that's the barrier before they can figure out how to address it. But yeah, if you look at people at a very senior level, very often they want things to the point, they want things short, they want things easy to consume, because they're really busy people. So when the audience of who you're communicating to changes as you get more senior and you're doing a lot more of your time and effort is communicating with people at those very senior levels, you have to adapt and be able to work to the needs of your audience. And if you can't, it is going to hold you back.
Yeah, and I think it's always important, isn't it? Especially if you've been in a role for a while and you're thinking that you've got an issue around communication and you're really struggling to get your point across, and you can feel people either finishing your sentences or speeding you up, or maybe not asking you for an update because they've not got time to listen to everything that you've got to say. It can start to have a real effect on your confidence, I think, because once you start feeling that way, it makes the communication even more difficult, because then you're second guessing yourself. So you might even add even more information into that conversation just to almost to try and rebuild your confidence, but it always has that opposite effect. So I think it's really important to go through all of your key stakeholders, all the people that you're linking in with, look at who you could be meeting with, and asking yourself, like, how will they want to receive the communication? What do they do? How will they receive it? Like, how can I make sure that I'm communicating with them in a way that works for them? And it's quite difficult, isn't it, to do that?
It is. And I think like I say, the reason why it's difficult to communicate succinctly can come from a number of different sources. But you're so right about the fact that when it happens, if you know that's your reputation, if you know that's what people think, you then start to second guess, and you will, or potentially what you then do is you start to stay quiet because you don't want to put yourself in that situation where others are ignoring you, or you can see that they're looking down, checking their phones or doing something else. So you hesitate to make a contribution, and then that exacerbates the problem because then you're not making the contribution that you could make. So yeah, it's such an important thing to be able to resolve this.
And I think as well, you've also got the factors of introvert versus extrovert that link in with this, haven't you? Because as an introvert, you tend to process a lot of your thoughts in your head, don't you? So you need to think them through sometimes before you want to speak them out loud, or before you can speak them out loud in a clear and succinct way. And if you're on the spot, if you're feeling the pressure to perform, that can make the communication a lot more difficult too, can't it?
Yeah, so I often will start with this. If somebody has brought this to coaching and they know that they need to communicate more succinctly, I will often ask them, do you find that when you are going home at the weekend after a crazy week at work, do you get more energy by being around people to lift you up over the weekend, or do you just want to batten down the hatches, close the doors, not even see your own family, and hold yourself up with either a Netflix binge or a book? Introverts gain energy by being alone. They don't gain energy by being around other people. It's not about social confidence. It's not that they can't be around other people, but that depletes them, it drains them. And for someone who is used to being in their own head in that way, and I am an introvert, I count myself in this as well, it can be really difficult to do your thinking aloud, because as an introvert, what I tend to do is I will do that thinking, come to a conclusion, and then I'm able to deliver something succinct once I've got to that conclusion. If I'm asked to participate at short notice without having that opportunity to do the internal prep, then that can go very wrong. I'll either go round in circles, go off on tangents, or I'll stutter to get my words out. And we communicate a lot between us on voice notes, and the number of times I will leave you a voice note that says, this is the third time I'm trying to record this. And it's because I just need to almost, it's my draft of my communication. If I try and just say it and I haven't considered what point am I trying to make, what do I think about it, what conclusions have I drawn, then I find it incredibly hard to communicate succinctly, because thinking aloud just does not come naturally to me. So I think often then when people realize that about themselves, there's a real penny drop moment of, oh, right, now I get it. Now I get why sometimes I can communicate succinctly and sometimes I find it more challenging. So yeah, for introverts, I think it's often really key to consider, how can you create yourself that opportunity to do the thinking and get your conclusion, because then you will naturally often be able to communicate with much more brevity.
Yeah, and that makes absolute sense. And I'm sure people who are listening are going to identify with that and go, oh my goodness, that is so me. Because I think sometimes, like, we hear introvert and extrovert and we make assumptions about what that actually means, but you don't ever really look into what that means for communication and what that means for how you process information. So I think it's a really good point to make. And we've got a little method that we use, haven't we, as well, that can maybe help some of the introverts out there to be able to communicate their points much more succinctly. So do you want to talk us through it?
So this is the prep method, and it's P is point, R is reason, E is example, and then P is point. So the idea is that you go through the sequence and you can then communicate something succinctly. So point, start with your main message. Reason, say why this matters. Give an example, one concrete illustration, and then point. So come back to your main message. So as an example, instead of saying, so I've been thinking about this website project and there are all these things happening, the developers mentioned some issues and the timeline is not where it's supposed to be, and it's quite complicated because this has happened over here and so said this, and you just take yourself off on a big long story. The prep method will communicate that by saying the website is at risk of missing the October deadline. The main issue is scope creep. We've had 3 significant requirement changes. And for example, a new payment integration that's being required would add 2 weeks. So I recommend that we either extend the deadline or manage to the original scope and take those other points for refinement after go live. Totally different way of delivering it. And the way that will be understood and how that will impact your credibility is completely different, because instead of a long meandering story where you're literally stream of consciousness taking people through all the things, you've taken the time to get to, what am I trying to say? What's the reason that thing matters? What's an example that backs me up? And then restating your point.
Yeah, the difference there in those messages was just huge, because that first one, you're thinking as the listener, like, where is this going? Am I getting an answer? Whereas with the second one, it was like, you can just feel that authority there as well. And especially if you're thinking about career progression and creating a stronger personal brand, like, they're the type of updates you want to be given in that second example, where it's like really clear to the point, and you can get that message out and move on really quickly and leave somebody with the knowledge of what is going on. So I absolutely love that. So let's think about the extroverts of the world. So extroverts can sometimes make conversations about themselves. So how do we overcome that? How do we with that?
So again, coming back to that question that I asked people of how do you want to spend your weekend, that helps them to identify where's my preference. Extroverts are the opposite of introverts. If you have a strong extroverted preference, then often you need to vocalize things to even know what you think. And so for extroverts, there is this sense of, I need to actually say it aloud to be able to make sense of it. And so what that can then do is, like you say, it can come across as being self-oriented. It can come across as it's all about them, because the way they're making sense of it aloud is by relating it to their own context. So they will naturally share personal experiences. They will be quite happy to jump in without something fully formed. So they can be the people that sometimes people roll their eyes because they're the first one to answer every question when a meeting is opened for participation. And they can come across as well sometimes as a bit competitive and being the one that has to jump in first and say something. Yeah, I think for extroverts, a lot of this is about creating a pause, creating that self-awareness, and not participating, but just slowing themselves down can make a huge difference.
Yeah. And I think with that as well, if people are regular listeners to the podcast, we're always talking about taking that pause. And I think that is super important under these circumstances. So we do have a little fix as well, don't we, for the extrovert? So talk us through the listen first rule.
So this is just a way to create that pause, really. And it's to focus on asking a question before giving your input. So rather than jump in with all the things that your brain is relating to whatever point you want to make, it's asking a question that would help to clarify or make something more specific. What that will then do is create that natural pause by opening airtime for other people and creating something more specific, so that when you do contribute, your brain isn't contributing to absolutely everything. It's more focused on something more specific.
Yeah, I love that. And I think when you start becoming more self-aware and realizing that you do need to take that pause, it can really make that difference, especially if you're delivering messages to more senior leaders or in meeting situations as well. So 2 brilliant little frameworks there that people can use if you're introvert or extrovert. It's definitely worth having a think about. how you're communicating and, you know, how you can improve that. And then I suppose the other thing that we've got in the mix with the introvert and extrovert side of things is just the general British directness. And we could call it a dilemma, maybe, because we do struggle, don't we? Because how do we balance being direct with being polite, especially in the British workplace culture?
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. And again, in my own career, there were times where, and I've talked about it before, where I am pretty direct. I am quite to the point. And there are times where people sometimes will be quite taken aback by that. So then to try and counteract that, I would then sometimes fluff things up. I would try and soften a message. I would try and do that polite chit chat piece. Lots of these things that I was trying to do to try and appear less intimidating, less direct. And I think that can happen for people that either naturally direct, where they then become over effusive and trying to counteract it, or where people naturally find that style quite difficult and it's not natural to them, then they can tend to overtalk as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like when you're in that situation, it can be quite difficult. And if you're the type of person that if you've been given feedback that you're too direct, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you're like, okay, how do I soften it up without diluting the message? And vice versa, if people are saying, you're too soft, you're not direct enough. It's, you know, how do you then overcome it? Because you don't want to appear rude or aggressive. So have you got any examples on how people could do that, how they could do it differently?
Absolutely. So this brings us back to one of our favorite frameworks that we've talked about numerous times on the podcast, which is radical candor. And within this, as a framework, if you haven't heard one of our episodes, you have two dimensions. You have being direct and being challenging, and you also have showing care and showing consideration. And radical candor is when you balance both and you do both. So if you struggle to do both, then that can be that you tend to find it difficult to be direct, and therefore you're in that more caring space but not direct. Or it can be that you need to dial up that caring and compassionate side. So finding that balance can often be as simple as finding some example things that you can say in certain situations that come up frequently. So, as an example, if you struggle to balance them both with disagreeing, then you could use a phrase like, I see that differently. This is my perspective. So, rather than saying, I disagree, which is dialing up the directness but might not be perceived as being considerate of somebody or respectful of somebody else's position, then what you're just saying is, I have a different perspective. This is my view on it. If you're sharing bad news, it might be, rather than you just plow in with that, it could be that you preface that by saying, I need to share something difficult. This might be an uncomfortable conversation, but it's important that we have it. And I've used that one before to go into that situation so that you're giving somebody that indication rather than just hitting them with it, or talking about the weather and being really nice and having a lovely chat and then wondering how the hell you're ever going to get to the bad news. So I think when you start to think about what situations do you find it challenging with, and come up with some phrases like that where you can open the conversation, that will really help. And I think if you think across all of the examples we've talked about, so much of the secret to being successful in communicating succinctly is in preparation. I think where it goes wrong is when people just let fly with whatever comes naturally. And that's where it goes wrong. If you put a bit more preparation into your communication, that's when you can be intentional and get the result you want by being more succinct.
Yeah, and I know I always take it back to interview prep, but it's the same kind of thing, isn't it? If you're thinking of those situations in advance that might come up and you've got a standard phrase or a way of dealing with it, like where you said, if you're disagreeing, I see it differently. here's why type of thing. If you've got that as your leading line for when you need to disagree with something, then that's going to make it easier. It's going to take the pressure off you, because what you're not doing is expecting your brain to find an answer in the moment, because you've already got what is effectively a stock answer to lead with. And then, you know, as time goes on and you practice it more and more, then you might want to slightly change that. You might want to try a different approach, but it will give you more confidence in your communication if you've got those stock answers ready to go, and it will feel much smoother. It'll feel easier. And I always feel like people respond a lot better, don't they? Especially with that example there, where you're just really taking the emotion out of it. It's, I see it differently. Here's why. And there's no emotion. It's just all about facts and what you're observing. And then you can have a really nice conversation or debate around it.
Yeah, if you come into it with I disagree, you're setting yourself up in conflict with that person's perspective. Whereas if you come at it from a perspective of I have a different view, this was my thinking, and you're prepared to listen to their thinking, you create the conditions for that to be a really good conversation, rather than the emotion of, oh, this is uncomfortable, they disagree, I've got to either defend my position or capitulate. So you just set the whole conversation up in a way that, like you say, takes the emotion out and focuses on understanding those different perspectives. And sometimes you find a whole new perspective that you can arrive at together.
Yeah. And it does absolutely make all of the difference when you're doing that. And it starts to feel more natural as well. The more times that you do that and you use those stock phrases that you've prepared in advance. So we always finish the podcast with some practical tips that you can take away and start using straight away. But I think today what we can do is share a framework that will bring all of these three things together that we've been talking about today. So we've got an amazing framework to talk through. I'm going to ask Jackie to talk us through it, but it's called the Bottom Line Upfront Framework, or BLUF for short.
Yeah, this is a really simple framework, and it's bottom line up front. I believe it originated from the US military. And the point of this is that you state that end point up front. So, what's the point you're trying to make? And instead of taking somebody on the journey and then making your point at the end, it's about making that key point at the beginning and then giving people an insight into your rationale or your reasons or your supporting evidence, depending on the context. It's brilliant for both verbal and written communication. So if you're somebody who tends to write really long emails, when people receive an email, most people are incredibly busy, and the idea of reading a big long email is a lot. So it can really help to hook people in, give them a reason at the start. And sometimes they won't read all the supporting information. That's the bit they need to know. But if they do have a detail orientation, or it is important, or they want to, then you've got that supporting information there.
Yeah, I think that is a brilliant framework to use because it's super simple, really easy to remember. And I think it's just one that you can just get started with straight away. So thanks for joining us on today's podcast. We know that communication style does directly impact how others perceive your leadership potential. But the good news is that it is a skill that you can practice and you can improve it immediately. If you feel like you're struggling to find your communication sweet spot, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, or you just find it difficult to be direct, coaching can really help. And we work with leaders to develop their authentic communication style while ensuring their message lands with impact. So do get in touch and let us know if you'd like to hear about all of the different options for coaching. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.